Summarizing fiction. So today our goal is really to practice the skill of summarizing the main idea of fictional stories by using details from the text. We'll be focusing on characters by looking at their traits, their motivations, and how even they change over the course of the story. So we might think, how are they in the beginning, and then how are they at the end? I'm going to be looking for you to describe a character in that way by looking for how they change, how they act. I'm going to be looking for you to retell important parts by focusing on the beginning, the middle, and the end. And also keeping your eye out for a problem. That's usually the juiciest part of the story and super important when we are retelling or summarizing. So I want to remind you that a summary is a shortened version of a story. When you summarize, you are retelling all the important parts. It is important to focus on the character since they are such an important part of the story. When you are retelling, you want to tell the story in sequence, meaning in the order in which it happens. You want to be able to summarize the beginning, then the middle, and the end, and you do it in a way where everything really connects, because a summary is really just a shortened version of the story. So you want to pick and choose the most important parts, which will include the characters, how they change, and maybe how the problem is solved. So again, to remind you, a summary is really just a shortened version of the story. And this chart here is just really helpful to keep you reminded of what to think about when you are coming up with your own summary. You want to remember that a summary is always in your own words, and you get the ideas and the details straight from the text. So again, you want to think about the beginning. Who are the characters? What is the setting? What is the problem? The middle, maybe what's happened to the characters since the beginning? Has anything changed yet? And then the end. How did the story end? And sometimes it's really fun to compare the ending to the beginning. What's so different between the two? So some ideas I like to consider when I'm summarizing is, as I'm obviously going back and rereading, I'm thinking deeply about the important parts of the book. So when I'm going back to a story, I might be thinking, what's so important about this story? Should this be included in my summary? And if I'm like, yeah, this should be included in my summary, I'll start thinking about, okay, what did the character do? What did the character learn? Where is it taking place? I just start considering all these different ideas. So you might be thinking, well, how can we do this? How can we practice this? Well, when you are finished with a story, I think you guys already know where this is going. It's so important to go back and reread. But as you're doing that, it's super important to start asking yourself a few questions. So when you read it the first time, like we did in class, we read the first time just to get the gist. So it's important to go back to read it the second and maybe even third time, and you start asking yourself those questions. You know, when you're taking your break, pauses, your stop and jots, or if you're pausing after a couple of sentences or a page or a paragraph, you can think, okay, who was the main character? What can you say about them so far? And then you can keep on adding to that as you continue reading. You can think about, where is the story taking place? Have they gone to multiple places throughout the story? What's the problem? Is there more than one problem? So you just want to consider all of these different details and ideas that can happen throughout the story, but you may have not caught it the first time. So how you can practice this is, after you read the first time and you start going back, start asking yourself a few questions. How did the character change from the beginning to the end? Am I going in order? They're all really important ideas to consider. And just to kind of build on the last point I made about, am I telling things in order? It's really important when you are considering that, because you want it to make sense to whoever you're telling this summary to. Or even just for yourself, if you're kind of summarizing in your reader's notebook or in your reading log. And I just wanted to give you guys a quick reminder, if you're talking about the beginning of the book, You might say in the beginning or once or, first. If you're talking about the middle of the book, you might be saying next, then, soon, eventually. And then the ending if you're talking about the ending of the book, you might say lastly, or by the end, or at the end, finally. So these are just some key words to really highlight and use when you are summarizing in the order sequence, in the order in which the book or the story has happened. So let's try. I'm going to show you a summary example that includes all of these different points that we've just discussed. And I'm going to use our Read Aloud Rose Blanche just to kind of give you guys an idea. So Rose Blanche is a young girl living in a small town in Germany. So right away, you see I identified the character, and I also identified the setting. And I just want to point out really quickly before I continue reading this summary example, when you are summarizing, like I stated before, it is a shortened version of the story. You don't need to include every single detail, so it is really important to kind of just get to the point, but you do want to include enough details that your summary makes sense to the reader and they can really get the gist of what the book is about. So, Rose Blanche is a young girl living in a small town in Germany. In the beginning, so I'm telling the beginning, some trucks with soldiers show up and take over the town. Then, some people are rounded up and put on the trucks that drive them away. Rose, curious about these truckloads of people, decides to follow them. So do you see how already I'm kind of describing the character, kind of inching into what the problem was, but I'm just kind of saying it in a way that makes sense to anybody that reads this, even if they're unfamiliar with the story, because I'm just quickly summarizing. Next, she follows the trucks out of town and through the fields and forests until she comes upon some buildings surrounded by pointy barbed wire and where there are lots of children just standing around. They tell Rose that they are very hungry. Rose keeps returning, bringing the children whatever food she could sneak away from home for them to eat. One night, the soldiers silently flee the area, followed by the townspeople also running away because other soldiers are on their way to the town. Eventually, not knowing what is happening, Rose takes her food and returns to where the children are, but the place is empty, and despite the dense fog, she can see that the children are gone. While she is standing there, there is a single gunshot. Rose is never seen again. So you might be thinking, well, Miss Blanda, you forgot this part. You didn't add this part. That's probably true. I did leave out a lot of important details, but the point of a summary is not to just retell the entire story. You're not retelling the story. Yes, you might be reusing or retelling a detail or two, but I don't want you to confuse that. A summary is a shortened version of the story. So again, going back to our chart over here, it can include details. It says it can be written in 3 to 5 sentences, but we can push that a little bit when we start really expanding our thinking. Am I talking about the characters? Am I including the problem? So again, I want you guys to really think about this example here that I used about how I went back and reread and just took those ideas and I really put them in my own words. And I was able to explain the character. I was able to explain how she was curious, how she, maybe I could have added in a few more words to describe her, but she kept returning, so she was pretty persistent. She kept going back to those children. And I was really able to think about the order in which all the events happened. So let's kind of review what I did. So after I reread Rose Blanche a few more times before I did my summary, I was able to ask myself some questions. Who was the main character? What were they like? And how would I describe them? And I did that right in the beginning. Where is the story taking place? I explained it was in Germany. I also explained how she was walking through the forest. And I also thought about the order in which I was explaining the text, I was also thinking about what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, and then finally how it ended. And then lastly, I reread it and I thought, did I write in complete sentences? Did I explain the important parts of the story in my own words? And I did all that. So today, you guys are going to try, after you listen to the new Read Aloud the Bracelet, please make sure you listen and leave a comment so I know that you listened to the story. I suggest you do read and listen to the bracelet a few times before answering the questions that have to do about summaries, meaning you're kind of giving a shortened version. Before you do it on the Google Doc, please read the read aloud a few times.